They told us the far side of the moon was nothing but rock and shadow, a dead place. But when we came over that horizon, I knew the charts were lying. There were towers there, black spires stabbing out of the regolith, taller than any skyscraper, so thin they seemed like they should snap. Yet they didn't even tremble in the vacuum. They weren't built by human hands, no rivets, no seams. The surfaces seemed to drink the light from our lamps, swallowing it until the shapes were more absence than object. And the angles. God, the angles. They bent in ways the mind doesn't want to understand, like geometry that wasn't made for human eyes. Mission Control told us to keep moving. Collect samples, proceed to Site C. Their voices sounded further away than they should have. Every step closer to the spires made my chest feel heavier, my thoughts slower. Then the humming started. It wasn't sound in the air, there is no air, but a vibration deep in my bones, syncing with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was which. That's when I heard the voice, a whisper, not in my ears but inside my head. It spoke in a language I'd never learned but understood completely, and every word was my name. I looked at the others. They didn't react. They didn't hear it. We camped that night on the crater's edge, the spires on the horizon. When I woke, the horizon was empty. The spires were gone. So were the other men. My footprints were the only ones in the dust. And then I realized the spires hadn't disappeared. They had moved. They were closer. That was 43 years ago. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm the only one who came back from Apollo 18, the mission that never happened, according to NASA. The mission they buried so deep that even I started to doubt it was real. But I know it was real because I still hear the voice. Every damn night since 1974, whispering my name in that impossible language. And lately, it's been getting louder. The doctors at the VA in Houston think it's PTSD. Combat stress from Vietnam, they say, bleeding into false memories about space missions that were cancelled before they launched. They give me pills that taste like chalk and make my hands shake. But the pills don't stop the dreams. They don't stop me from waking up with lunar dust under my fingernails, even though I haven't been within 1,000 miles of a launch pad in decades. They especially don't explain why satellite photos from the far side keep getting classified, or why the Chinese lunar program suddenly went radio silent after their rover reached the von Karman crater, or why every space agency on Earth seems hell-bent on keeping humans away from that godforsaken rock. Tonight, though, I found out why. Tonight, I'm going to tell you what's really waiting on the dark side of the moon. What's been waiting there for 43 years, calling my name. What's been building. I'm sitting in Tommy Briggs' garage in Clear Lake, Texas, 3 blocks from where the Johnson Space Center pretends the last 40 years never happened. Tommy's been my drinking buddy since we both got back from Southeast Asia, and he's the only bastard I trust enough to tell this story to. He's also the only one who might believe it. You're shitting me, Jake. Tommy sets down his Lone Star and stares at me across his workbench. Motor oil stains his fingers black, and there's something about the way the fluorescent light hits his weathered face that makes him look older than his 68 years. Apollo 18 was scrubbed. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows what they were told. I pull out the manila folder I've been carrying around for 2 decades. Inside are photographs that shouldn't exist, mission logs that were supposed to be destroyed, and a single piece of rock that gleams like obsidian but feels warm to the touch. Look at these. Tommy slides on his reading glasses, the same pair he's worn since his days as a NASA contractor. His eyes narrow as he studies the first photograph, a shot of the Orion Command Module in Earth orbit, clearly labelled with mission designations that don't match official records. This could be fake, he says, but his voice lacks conviction. Keep looking. The second photo shows 3 astronauts in full EVA suits standing beside a lunar module. The landscape behind us is harsh and alien, nothing like the smooth Maria of the near side. I can see myself in that picture, younger and stupider, holding a flag that never made it into any history book. That's you, Tommy whispers. Jesus Christ, that's really you. December 1974. We launched during a communication blackout, used the cover of a Soviet test mission to mask our trajectory. The whole thing was compartmentalized so tight that even the flight directors didn't know the real destination until we were already in lunar orbit. Tommy flips through more photos, images of equipment I can barely remember the names for, surface operations that feel like someone else's memories. Then he reaches the last one, and his hand starts to shake. It's a long-distance shot of the spires. Even in the grainy photograph, they seem to absorb light, creating dark wounds in the lunar landscape. The perspective makes them look impossibly tall, like black needles trying to puncture the starfield above. What the hell are those? Before I can answer, the temperature in the garage drops 20 degrees. Our breath starts fogging, and the fluorescent lights begin to flicker in a pattern that's almost musical. Tommy's radio, which had been playing some old country station, suddenly fills with static, punctuated by what sounds like whispers. The rock in my folder starts to glow. "Turn off the lights," I tell him. "What?" "Turn off the fucking lights, Tommy. Now." He hits the switch and the garage plunges into darkness. But the rock is still glowing, pulsing with the same rhythm as my heartbeat. The whispers from the radio resolve into something clearer, a voice speaking in that impossible language I learned 43 years ago. Jake Morrison, come home, Jake Morrison." Tommy's backing toward the door, fumbling for the handle. "What is that? What's happening?" "It's calling me." The words taste like metal in my mouth. It's been calling me for 43 years, and I think it's getting tired of waiting. The lights come back on by themselves. The radio goes silent. The rock fades to its normal obsidian black, but I can still feel warmth radiating from it through the folder. Tommy's face has gone pale. "Jake, what did you find up there?" "I don't know, but I think it found us first." I close the folder and stand up. Outside, thunder rumbles across Clear Lake, even though the sky was clear when I arrived an hour ago. Through Tommy's garage window, I can see the streetlights starting to flicker in sequence, like a slow-motion wave rolling down the block. "The Chinese mission went dark 3 days ago," I tell him. "Their rover stopped transmitting right after it entered the von Karman crater. Same crater where we found the spires." So the last transmission was video footage, 47 seconds of their rover climbing a ridge, and then the camera pans up to show the horizon. I meet his eyes. "The spires are gone, Tommy. They're not on the far side anymore." Tommy sits down heavily on his workbench. "Where are they?" "I think they're coming here." The thunder rolls again, closer this time. Through the window, I watch a neighbor's dog bolt across the street, tail tucked between its legs. The animal moves like it's running from something, but the street is empty. "Why are you telling me this?" Tommy asks. "Because someone needs to know, because if something happens to me, someone needs to warn people." I fold the photographs and put them back in my jacket pocket. And because I think it's almost time. Time for what? The lights flicker once more, and for just a second I swear I can see shadows moving wrong, bending at angles that don't match the objects casting them. The whisper of my name echoes in the space between heartbeats. Time to finish what we started up there. We're driving through Houston's back streets at 2 a.m, Tommy's pickup rattling over potholes that seem deeper than they were yesterday. The radio keeps cutting in and out, catching fragments of late-night talk shows and static that sounds almost like conversation. Every time it happens, the lunar sample in my jacket pocket grows warm against my ribs. "Where exactly are we going?" Tommy asks, gripping the steering wheel tighter as another streetlight flickers out ahead of us. "NASA Archive Facility on Bay Area Boulevard. I still have a friend there." At 2 a.m. Dwight Kowalski never sleeps. Hasn't slept right since he worked telemetry on the Apollo program. I light a cigarette, my hands steadier than they've been in years. He's the one who saved these photos when they ordered the purge. Tommy turns onto a side road that parallels the facility's fence line. Through the chain link, I can see the low concrete buildings that house 40 years of classified space program documents. Most people think NASA keeps their secrets at Johnson Space Center, but the real archives are here, tucked away in an industrial park between a tire shop and a Mexican restaurant. There, I point to a service entrance where a thin man in his 70s is smoking under a security light. Dwight Kowalski looks exactly like what he is. A government employee who's seen too much and said too little. His grey hair is thinning, his clothes are rumpled, and there's a nervous energy about him that suggests he's been waiting for us. He tosses his cigarette as we approach. "Jake Morrison," he says, like he's announcing a death. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "You know why I'm here?" Same reason the phones have been ringing off the hook for 3 days. Same reason every satellite monitoring the lunar surface went offline yesterday. Dwight pulls out a keycard and swipes it at the door. The Chinese aren't the only ones who've gone quiet. Inside, the archive facility hums with the sound of climate control systems working overtime. Dwight leads us through rows of filing cabinets and computer terminals, past boxes labelled with mission numbers that don't exist in official records. The air smells like paper and ozone, with an underlying metallic tang that reminds me uncomfortably of the lunar surface. "Here's what I pulled after the call came in," Dwight says, stopping at a table covered with photographs, printouts, and what looks like medical records. Every classified document related to lunar observation in the past 72 hours. The first photo shows a satellite image of the moon's far side, time-stamped 36 hours ago. The von Karman crater is clearly visible, along with the distinctive ridgeline where we made camp in 1974. But the area where the spires once stood is empty, just smooth regolith stretching to the horizon. "Now look at this one," Dwight says, sliding another image across the table. Same location, time-stamped 24 hours later. The crater floor shows disturbances, long gouges in the surface, as if something massive had been dragged or had moved on its own. Tommy leans closer. "Those look like tracks." 12 miles long, Dwight confirms, leading from the original site toward the moon's limb, toward Earth. The next document is a communication transcript from the European Space Agency's Lunar Monitoring Station. 3 days ago, their radio telescopes started picking up transmissions from the far side. Not the usual background radiation, but organized signals. Patterns that repeated every few hours, growing stronger each time. "They tried to decode it," Dwight explains. "Best linguists in Europe, computer analysis, the works. But the only word they could identify was English." "What word?" I ask, though I already know. "Morrison. Jake Morrison. Over and over for 18 hours straight." The final item on the table is a medical file with my name on it, dated 3 days ago. It contains a sleep study from the VA hospital, brain scans that show unusual activity in my temporal lobe, and a note from my psychiatrist about auditory hallucinations increasing in frequency and clarity. "They've been monitoring you," Dwight says. "Ever since the Chinese mission went dark, someone's been very interested in the only living astronaut from Apollo 18. Someone above my clearance level, way above." Tommy picks up one of the radio transcripts and studies it. "This is fucking insane. You're telling me something on the moon has been broadcasting Jake's name to Earth?" "Not just broadcasting," Dwight corrects him. "Responding. Every time Jake has one of his episodes, the voices, the whispers, our monitoring stations pick up a corresponding burst of activity from lunar orbit." "Lunar orbit? Not the surface?" "That's right. Whatever was on the far side, it's not there anymore. It's somewhere between the moon and Earth, and it's getting closer." The lights in the archive facility flicker, and Dwight's computer terminal suddenly comes to life without anyone touching it. Lines of text scroll across the screen. Coordinates, trajectory calculations, and a countdown timer showing 27 hours, 43 minutes, 18 seconds. "What's that counting down to?" Tommy asks. Before Dwight can answer, every piece of electronic equipment in the room starts malfunctioning simultaneously. Printers begin churning out pages of static, computer screens display impossible geometric shapes, and the building's PA system crackles to life with that familiar whisper. "Jake Morrison. Come home, Jake Morrison." The voice is clearer now, more present. It's not just in my head anymore. It's in the room with us, speaking from every speaker at once. The countdown timer on Dwight's screen jumps forward by 6 hours. "Jesus Christ," Dwight breathes, staring at his screen. The descent trajectory just accelerated. "Descent to where?" I demand. He points to a map of Texas on his wall where red pins mark NASA facilities. A new pin has appeared, glowing softly in the dim light. It's stuck in Clear Lake, 3 blocks from Tommy's garage. "It's coming here," Tommy says. "It's coming to Houston." The PA system cuts out and the building falls silent except for the hum of struggling electronics. But I can still feel the presence, pressing against my thoughts like a memory trying to surface. The lunar sample in my pocket has grown so warm it's almost burning. "We need to leave," I tell them. "Now." "Where?" Dwight asks, already moving toward the exit. "Somewhere with no electronics, somewhere it can't follow us." I grab the most important documents from the table and stuff them into a briefcase. And somewhere I can figure out what the hell I brought back from that crater 43 years ago. As we reach the door, the building's emergency lights activate, bathing everything in red. Through the windows, I can see the Houston skyline in the distance, and every light in the city seems to be flickering in sequence. The countdown has begun. We drive for 2 hours through back roads that smell like pine and stagnant water, heading deeper into the East Texas wilderness. No cell towers, no radio stations, no electronic billboards, just darkness broken by the occasional farmhouse light. Tommy found this place years ago during his hunting trips, an abandoned ranger station deep in the Sam Houston National Forest, far enough from civilization that you can actually see the stars. The cabin sits on the edge of a small lake, its windows boarded up and its roof sagging from decades of neglect. But it has what we need: isolation, and thick enough walls that whatever's following us might lose the signal. "This is fucking crazy," Tommy mutters as he kills the engine. "We're hiding in the woods like criminals." "Better than being sitting ducks in the city," Dwight says, clutching his briefcase full of classified documents. He hasn't stopped shaking since we left the archive facility. "Besides, if I'm right about the descent trajectory, we've got maybe 20 hours before..." "Before what?" Tommy snaps. "Before aliens land in Houston, before the boogeyman comes knocking." I climb out of the truck and breathe deeply. The air tastes clean, unmarked by the metallic tang that's been following me for days. For the first time in 48 hours, the lunar sample in my pocket feels cool against my ribs. "It's quieter here," I tell them. "Whatever that thing is, it needs electronics to track me. No cell towers, no satellites, no..." The words die in my throat as I look up at the night sky. There, hanging low over the tree line, is something that shouldn't exist. It's not quite a star and not quite a planet. More like a wound in space itself, darker than the darkness around it. And it's moving. "Do you see that?" I whisper. Dwight follows my gaze and goes pale. "That's not on any astronomical chart." "Because it wasn't there yesterday," Tommy says grimly. "Jesus, Jake, that thing's the size of Manhattan." Inside the cabin, we work by the light of battery-powered lanterns, spreading Dwight's documents across a folding table that creaks under the weight of 4 decades of secrets. The file folders contain everything: mission transcripts from Apollo 18, geological surveys of the Von Karman crater, and photographs of lunar surface features that were classified the moment they were developed. But it's the medical files that tell the real story. "Look at this," Dwight says, pointing to a brain scan dated December 1974. "This was taken 3 days after you returned from the mission. See these dark areas in your temporal lobe?" The scan shows my brain lit up like a Christmas tree, but with strange shadows clustered around the regions responsible for memory and language processing. They look almost like scarring, but too symmetrical to be natural. Now compare it to this one from last week. The recent scan shows the same shadows, but larger, much larger. They've spread through my temporal lobe like ink through water, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. It's been growing, I realize. For 43 years, it's been growing in my brain. Not just growing, Dwight corrects me, organizing, creating neural pathways that shouldn't exist, teaching your brain to understand something that human minds weren't designed to process. Tommy stands up so fast his chair falls over. "Are you saying that thing infected Jake? That he's been carrying some kind of alien virus in his head for 4 decades? "Not a virus," I say quietly, the truth hitting me like a physical blow. "A beacon." The cabin falls silent except for the soft hiss of the lanterns. Outside, night birds have stopped singing and even the insects have gone quiet. The darkness pressing against the windows feels heavier, more intentional. Every time I heard the voice, every time I had an episode, I was transmitting our location back to them, I continue. The brain scans, the radio telescopes picking up signals. It wasn't them calling to me. It was me calling to them. Dwight nods grimly. The neural modifications created a quantum entanglement effect. Every time you experienced what you thought were hallucinations, you were actually establishing two-way communication across 240,000 miles of space. Which means, Tommy says, his voice hollow, you led them here. The accusation hangs in the air like a physical thing. I want to deny it, to argue that I didn't know, that I couldn't have known. But the evidence is right there in black and white. Brain scans showing alien architecture growing in my skull. Communication logs proving that my episodes triggered responses from lunar orbit. I didn't know, I finally whisper. But you suspected, Tommy says. That's why you kept the rock. That's why you never got rid of the photographs. Part of you wanted them to find you. Before I can answer, the temperature in the cabin plummets. Our breath begins to fog, and ice crystals start forming on the windows. The battery-powered lanterns flicker once, twice, then burn brighter than they should be capable of burning. That's impossible, Dwight stammers. There's no electronics here, nothing to... His words cut off as his eyes roll back in his head. He starts to convulse, his body jerking like he's been grabbed by invisible hands. Foam bubbles from his mouth, but it's not white. It's silver, metallic, reflecting the lantern light like mercury. Dwight! Tommy lunges forward, but I grab his arm. And don't touch him! Dwight's convulsions stop. He stands up slowly, mechanically, his movements too precise to be human. When he turns to face us, his eyes have changed. They're still brown, but now they reflect light like mirrors, and there's something moving behind them. Geometric shapes that shift and dance in ways that make my vision blur. Jake Morrison, he says, but it's not his voice anymore. It's the voice I've been hearing for 43 years, speaking through his mouth like he's a radio receiver. You have served your purpose. Tommy pulls out a hunting knife, but his hands are shaking so badly he can barely grip it. What did you do to him? We have prepared him for integration, Dwight's body says, as we prepared this one long ago. The thing wearing Dwight's face turns to me and I see knowledge in those mirror eyes. Knowledge of every moment since I first heard the voice, every decision that led us to this cabin, every step in a plan I never knew I was part of. The neural modifications were not random, it continues. They were an instruction set, a program designed to bring you to the correct temporal spatial coordinates for retrieval. Retrieval? Tommy brandishes the knife like it's a magic ward. What the hell does that mean? Dwight's head tilts at an angle no human neck should achieve. We require a native guide for the final phase, one who understands both human neural architecture and our geometric language, one who has been prepared. The lunar sample in my pocket suddenly blazes with heat, burning through fabric to sear the skin over my ribs. I pull it out, gasping, and see that it's no longer black obsidian. It's translucent now, pulsing with the same rhythm as my heartbeat, and inside it I can see tiny structures that look like the spires from the crater, geometric impossibilities that my brain somehow recognizes as navigation coordinates. You're not here to invade, I realize. You're here to go home, and you want me to show you the way. The thing in Dwight's body smiles with muscles that no longer move quite right. The Morrison unit has achieved understanding. Prepare for neural interface. Tommy screams and lunges with the knife, but Dwight's body moves faster than any human should. One hand catches Tommy's wrist and twists, and the wet crack of breaking bone echoes through the cabin. Tommy drops the knife and collapses, clutching his shattered arm. The secondary units are unnecessary, Dwight's voice says, and I realize with growing horror that it's already considering Tommy expendable. That's when I understand the full scope of my betrayal. I didn't just lead them to Earth, I led them to my friends, to the only people who knew the truth about Apollo 18. The neural modifications haven't just been preparing me as a guide. They've been using me to eliminate witnesses. The dark shape in the sky outside grows larger, blotting out more stars. Through the cabin windows, I can see smaller shapes descending, geometric forms that hurt to look at directly, moving with purpose through the forest toward our location. 27 minutes until full descent, Dwight announces, though his mouth doesn't quite sync with the words anymore. Prepare the Morrison unit for transport. The lanterns flare once more, then die completely. In the absolute darkness that follows, I hear Tommy whimpering from pain and Dwight's breathing, except it's not quite breathing anymore. It's more like machinery cycling, regular and mechanical and utterly inhuman. And somewhere in that darkness, I feel the neural pathways in my brain beginning to burn. I drag Tommy behind the cabin's old stone fireplace while Dwight's transformed body stands motionless in the center of the room, head tilted like he's listening to instructions only he can hear. Tommy's arm hangs at an impossible angle, but he's conscious and trying not to scream. We need to get out of here, I whisper, using my belt to fashion a crude sling for his broken arm. Where? Tommy hisses through gritted teeth. That thing said 27 minutes. 27 minutes until what? Through the gaps in the boarded windows, I can see lights moving through the forest. Not flashlights or vehicle headlights, but geometric patterns of illumination that pulse in sync with my heartbeat. They're getting closer, and there are more of them than I initially thought. Until they finish what they started in 1974, I tell him, checking the translucent sample that's now burning a hole through my jacket pocket. The tiny spire-like structures inside it are moving, rotating through configurations that make my vision swim. This whole thing was never about invasion. It was about going home. Tommy stares at me like I've lost my mind. Home? Think about it. Those spires on the lunar surface. They weren't built there. They were crashed there, stranded there. The words spill out of me as understanding floods my neural pathways. Information I shouldn't know but somehow do. The moon isn't their destination, it's their prison. Dwight's body suddenly turns toward our hiding spot, those mirror eyes reflecting the strange lights from outside. The Morrison unit is achieving clarity, neural integration at 73%. Shut up, I growl, but even as I say it, I can feel something shifting in my brain. The dark areas from the medical scans are heating up, creating connections that shouldn't exist. New knowledge flows through me like water through a broken dam. I see it now. The real story. 43 years ago, Apollo 18 wasn't sent to explore the far side of the moon. We were sent to investigate a crash site. Something had been detected by deep space monitoring stations in 1969. A massive object that struck the lunar surface with enough force to register on seismographs back on Earth. The impact was hidden from public view, classified under national security protocols that went all the way to the president. The spires weren't structures, I whisper, the truth cutting through me like a blade. They were survivors, the last remnants of a ship that crashed on the moon 50 years ago. Ship! Tommy clutches his broken arm tighter. What kind of ship? Through Dwight's mouth, the voice answers, dimensional transport vessel, designed for transit between parallel geometric spaces. The lunar impact damaged our navigation cortex and trapped us in your reality matrix. Jesus Christ, Tommy breathes, they're refugees. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what I'm learning about Earth itself. Knowledge flooding through the neural modifications like data through fiber optic cables. The thing that crashed on the moon wasn't alone. It was fleeing something that's been hunting it across dimensional barriers for millennia. The real threat isn't them, I realize, looking at Dwight's possessed form. It's whatever they were running from. As if summoned by my words, every electronic device within a 50-mile radius suddenly comes back online. Car alarms blare in the distance, cell phone towers begin broadcasting at maximum power, and even the old ranger station's defunct radio crackles to life. But the signals aren't random, they're coordinated, pulsing in patterns that make the air itself vibrate. Dimensional breach detected, Dwight announces, his voice now layered with harmonics that hurt to hear. Pursuer entities have located our exit trajectory. Time to departure, 14 minutes, 37 seconds. Through the cabin windows, the night sky tears open like fabric. What emerges defies every law of physics I've ever learned. shapes that exist in more dimensions than human sight can process, moving through space in ways that make geometry weep. They're beautiful and terrifying, like crystalline spiders the size of city blocks, and they're heading straight for Earth. The hunters, Dwight says, and for the first time since his transformation I hear genuine fear in his voice. They consume dimensional refugees. They have followed us here. Tommy grabs my arm with his good hand. You're telling me we've got two sets of aliens? The crashed ones and the ones hunting them. The spire entities need my neural pathways to navigate back to their home dimension, I explain. The words flowing from knowledge I shouldn't possess. But the hunters will destroy this entire reality to prevent their escape. The lunar sample in my pocket suddenly flares with brilliant light, projecting a three-dimensional map of dimensional barriers into the air above us. I can see the pathway the refugees want to take, a route that leads away from our reality through spaces that exist between thoughts. But I can also see the hunter's approach vector, a trajectory that will intersect with Earth in less than 15 minutes. There's a way out, I tell them, studying the projection, but it requires someone with modified neural architecture to guide them through the dimensional maze. You mean you have to go with them, Tommy says. If I don't, the hunters will tear this dimension apart looking for them. Every human being on Earth will die. Dwight's body jerks as competing signals war for control of his nervous system. Morrison Unit must choose: guide us to dimensional exit, or remain and witness the consumption of your species. Through the windows, the hunter ships are getting closer. Where they pass, reality seems to fray at the edges. Trees wither and collapse, the lake water begins boiling, and the very air shimmers with dimensional instability. There's a third option, Tommy says suddenly. What if you could trap them here, both sides? I stare at him. What do you mean? Those neural modifications, they work both ways, right? You can communicate with the spire things, but maybe you can also jam their signals, confuse their navigation so they can't leave. That would trap the hunters here too, I point out. Maybe. Or maybe it would give Earth's governments time to figure out a defense, time to evacuate people, or build weapons, or... He trails off, staring at his broken arm. Hell, I don't know. But it's better than just letting you disappear into another dimension while everyone we've ever known gets eaten by space spiders. The projection from the lunar sample shifts, showing new possibilities. I can see the pathway that would strand both alien factions in our reality, creating a three-way conflict with humanity caught in the middle. It's not a good option, but it's an option. 11 minutes, 22 seconds, Dwight reports. Morrison Unit must initiate neural interface or prepare for dimensional collapse. I look at Tommy crouched behind the fireplace with his arm hanging useless, blood seeping through the makeshift sling. I think about everyone back in Houston, millions of people sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their reality is about to be shredded by forces beyond their comprehension. There's a fourth option, I say quietly. I could overload the neural pathways, create enough interference to collapse the dimensional breach entirely. And it would probably kill me, along with every modified brain cell in my head. Dwight's mirror eyes lock onto mine. Self-termination of the Morrison Unit would strand all dimensional entities in your reality matrix indefinitely. This outcome is unacceptable. Maybe, I say, standing up and walking toward him, but it would give humanity a fighting chance. The hunter ships breach the cloud layer and their shadows begin falling across the forest like the wings of impossible birds. Time is running out, and I can feel the neural modifications in my brain heating up, preparing for the final interface. One way or another, the next 10 minutes will determine the fate of 3 species. I take 3 steps toward Dwight before the world explodes into chaos. The hunter ships pierce the dimensional barrier like needles through silk, and reality begins to unravel around us. The cabin walls ripple like water, solid wood becoming translucent, then transparent, then something that exists in colors my eyes weren't designed to process. Through the dissolving roof, I can see the night sky folding in on itself, constellations rearranging into geometric patterns that spell out words in languages older than human civilization. Neural interface initiating, Dwight announces, his body moving toward me with mechanical precision. But something's wrong with his movements. They're too fast, covering distance that shouldn't exist as space itself warps around us. The lunar sample in my pocket burns like a star going nova. I pull it out, and the translucent rock has become something else entirely, a miniature dimensional gateway showing the pathway home that the refugees so desperately need. Inside its crystalline depths, I can see their true forms, not spires or towers, but beings of living geometry, mathematical concepts given consciousness, beautiful and alien and utterly inhuman. "Jake!" Tommy screams from behind the fireplace, but his voice sounds like it's coming from miles away. When I turn to look at him, I see multiple versions of him existing simultaneously. Tommy clutching his broken arm, Tommy standing and running, Tommy dissolved into component atoms. The dimensional instability is creating temporal echoes, showing us all the possible outcomes at once. That's when the betrayal comes. "I'm sorry, Morrison." The voice comes from outside the cabin, amplified by military speakers. Through the collapsing walls, I see them. Black helicopters hovering in formation, soldiers rappelling down on cables that seem to exist in more dimensions than 3. This is General Patricia Hawthorne, Strategic Dimensional Command. You're coming with us. Strategic Dimensional Command, a branch of the military that shouldn't exist, dealing with threats that shouldn't be real. But as soldiers in hazmat suits storm through what used to be the cabin door, I realize this has all been orchestrated. The archive facility, the classified documents, even Dwight's presence. It was all designed to bring me here, to this moment, to this choice. "You've been monitoring me," I say, raising the glowing sample above my head. "For 43 years you've been watching and waiting." "Longer than that," General Hawthorne replies through her radio. She's a tall woman in her 50s, standing beside an armored vehicle that has too many angles and seems to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. "We've been tracking dimensional incursions since 1947. Apollo 18 wasn't a NASA mission, it was ours." The soldiers surround me, but they're not moving to capture me. They're pointing their weapons at Dwight, whose mirror eyes now reflect something that makes several of the men stagger backward. Behind them, Tommy is being loaded onto a stretcher, his broken arm properly splintered but his face pale with shock. "The neural modifications were our design," Hawthorne continues, "developed from recovered technology and implanted during your debriefing period after the mission. We needed a way to communicate with dimensional refugees to understand their technology, their intentions. You turned me into a goddamn antenna," I spit. "We turned you into humanity's first line of defense." Above us, the hunter ships are descending through layers of reality that peel away like onion skins. Where they pass, the forest withers and dies, not from heat or radiation, but from something worse, the complete absence of possibility. Trees that existed become trees that never were, their atoms forgetting how to hold together. 8 minutes, 47 seconds to full dimensional collapse, Dwight reports, but now his voice has an electronic quality, like he's speaking through military communications equipment. Morrison Unit Neural Interface required for navigation protocol. General Hawthorne steps forward and I can see that she's wearing some kind of dimensional stabilization suit that keeps her solid while reality shifts around us. "We can't let them leave, Morrison. The refugees' technology is too valuable, and we sure as hell can't let the hunters establish a foothold in our reality." "So what's your plan?" I ask, though I already know the answer. "Controlled dimensional lock. We trap both factions here, study them, learn from them, turn their technology against future incursions." She gestures toward the dissolving landscape. "The neural interface you've developed is the key. With your modified pathways, we can create a permanent dimensional anchor. At the cost of my sanity, probably my life. At the cost of ensuring human survival." The soldiers around us are struggling to maintain formation as reality continues to break down. Some of them are aging rapidly, their faces wrinkling and their hair turning grey. Others appear to be getting younger, their equipment becoming newer, shinier. Time itself is becoming unstable. "There's another option," I tell her, holding up the lunar sample. Its glow has intensified, and I can feel the dimensional pathway it contains pressing against the barriers of our reality. "I let the refugees go home. They closed the dimensional breach behind them. trapping the hunters here but giving us a chance to fight them on our terms. Unacceptable, Dwight says, his voice now clearly coming through military radio equipment hidden in his body. Morrison unit will comply with strategic dimensional command protocols. That's when I understand the full scope of the betrayal. Dwight was never possessed by the refugees. He's been working for the military all along, his transformation an act designed to make me trust the information he provided. The neural modifications, the brain scans, even Tommy's presence here. It's all been orchestrated to bring me to this moment of choice. You bastards, I whisper. You've been playing all sides. For 43 years, Hawthorne confirms, managing the refugee situation, monitoring the hunter incursions, preparing for the day when we could capture both technologies simultaneously. Above us, one of the hunter ships extends something that might be a sensor array or might be a weapon. Where it touches the edge of reality, space simply ceases to exist, leaving behind a void that hurts to look at. The cabin, what's left of it, begins to dissolve from the edges inward. 6 minutes, 12 seconds, Dwight announces. I look at Tommy on his stretcher, conscious now and staring at me with eyes that hold 40 years of friendship and betrayal. I look at the soldiers in their dimensional suits, ready to sacrifice everything for the sake of technological advancement. I look at General Hawthorne, who has turned first contact with an alien species into a military operation. And I look at the lunar sample in my hands, containing the hopes and dreams of beings who have been running from extinction for millennia. You want a controlled dimensional lock? I ask. Correct. Then you're going to get one. I crush the sample in my hands. The crystalline structure shatters, releasing 43 years of stored dimensional energy directly into my modified neural pathways. The refugee's navigation data floods through my brain like liquid fire, burning new connections, creating pathways that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. But I don't guide them home. Instead, I redirect the dimensional gateway, twisting it through configurations that violate every law of physics I've ever learned. The pathway that should lead to safety becomes a maze of impossible angles, trapping the refugee ship in a dimensional loop that feeds back on itself. "What are you doing?" Hawthorne screams. "Giving everyone what they deserve," I tell her as blood begins pouring from my eyes and nose. The neural modifications are burning out, taking parts of my brain with them, but I hold on to the dimensional lock through sheer willpower. The hunter ships, sensing their prey trapped in the dimensional maze, dive toward Earth with renewed fury. Their weapons begin charging reality-warping devices that will strip the planet down to its component atoms in their search for the refugees. But they don't realize I've trapped them too. The dimensional lock expands, creating a bubble of altered space-time around the entire forest. The hunter ships slam into the barrier and stick there, caught like flies in amber, their exotic weapons useless against a paradox that exists in 12 dimensions simultaneously. Dimensional anchor established, Dwight reports, his voice distorting as the communications equipment in his body begins to malfunction. All extra-dimensional entities contained within a 20-mile radius. General Hawthorne stares at me with a mixture of admiration and horror. You've created a permanent prison. Nothing can get in or out. Including us, I remind her, as the dimensional barrier solidifies around us. The forest, the lake, the ruins of the cabin. We're all trapped together now, human and alien alike, in a pocket of reality that obeys different rules. Tommy manages to sit up on his stretcher, cradling his broken arm. So, what happens now? I collapse to my knees as the last of my neural modifications burn out, leaving behind holes in my memory and a skull full of scar tissue. But I'm still alive, and more importantly, I'm still human. Now we figure out how to coexist, I tell him, looking up at the hunter ships frozen in the dimensional barrier above us, beautiful and terrible and completely helpless, or we all die trying. 3 hours after the dimensional lock, I'm sitting by the lakeshore watching reality bend in ways that make my head ache. The water reflects not just the sky, but layers of sky from parallel dimensions, creating a kaleidoscope of possibilities. Fish swim through liquid that exists in several time streams simultaneously, aging and dying and being born again in endless loops. Tommy sits beside me on a fallen log, his arm properly set now by one of the military medics. The soldiers have established a perimeter around what used to be the cabin, their equipment struggling to function in the altered physics of our prison. General Hawthorne paces nearby, barking orders into a radio that occasionally works. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" Tommy asks quietly. "Saved the world from interdimensional war. Doomed us all to die in a cosmic fishbowl." He picks up a stone and skips it across the water. The stone bounces 7 times, then starts bouncing backward, reversing its trajectory until it lands back in his hand. "Jesus, Jake, what were you thinking?" I wish I could tell him. But the truth is, I wasn't thinking at all. The neural modifications had been burning out, flooding my brain with impossible knowledge, and in that moment of crisis, I'd acted on instinct rather than logic. Now we're all paying the price. The barrier won't hold forever, I admit. Dimensional locks are inherently unstable. Maybe days, maybe weeks, but eventually this whole pocket reality will collapse. And when it does, everything inside gets scattered across multiple dimensions. We become quantum ghosts, existing everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Tommy tosses the stone again, watching it perform the same impossible reverse trajectory. "So we need a way out. We need a miracle." That's when Dwight approaches us. The military equipment hidden in his body has been damaged by the dimensional instability, sparks occasionally shooting from his left ear. But his mirror eyes have returned to normal brown, and when he speaks, it's with his own voice for the first time in hours. "Not a miracle," he says, sitting down heavily beside us. "An alliance." "You're working for the military," Tommy points out. "Why should we trust anything you say?" "Because I've been conscious this whole time, aware but unable to control my actions while that damn neural implant overrode my motor functions." Dwight touches his temple, where I can now see a small surgical scar. "They put me under surveillance 43 years ago, same as Jake, but instead of letting me hear voices, they turned me into a remote control puppet." I study his face, looking for signs of deception. The transformation in the cabin, that was all an act. The seizure was real, the silver foam, the mirror eyes, that was the implant taking full control of my nervous system, but the consciousness behind it was always military, never alien. He pulls out a small electronic device that looks like a hearing aid. When the dimensional lock formed, it fried most of their equipment, including this. The device is cracked and smoking, clearly beyond repair. Without it, Dwight appears to be himself again, tired, scared, and genuinely angry at being used as a pawn for 4 decades. "What kind of alliance are you proposing?" I ask. "The refugees have been trying to communicate with us, not through military channels, but directly. Mental contact with anyone whose brain has been modified by their technology." Dwight taps his temple again. "The implant left traces. I can hear them now, faintly." "What are they saying?" "They're offering to teach us how to destabilize the dimensional lock from the inside, free everyone, send the hunters back to their own reality, close the dimensional breach permanently." Tommy leans forward. "What's the catch?" "They need a guide, someone with enough neural modification to interface with their navigation systems, someone willing to link their consciousness with theirs long enough to coordinate the breakdown." I already know where this is going. My modifications burned out. Not completely. The pathways are damaged, but they're still there. Scarred neural tissue that could potentially handle one more interface. Dwight meets my eyes. But it would be one way. The process would complete the job the modifications started, burning out your higher brain functions completely. "He'd become a vegetable," Tommy says bluntly. "He'd become a bridge, conscious but no longer human, existing partially in their reality and partially in ours." Dwight pulls a small notebook from his jacket, filled with equations and diagrams that hurt to look at. "I've been working on this for 20 years, trying to understand the mathematics of dimensional interface. The theory is sound." I flip through the notebook, seeing calculations that describe the relationship between consciousness and geometry, formulas that define the shape of thought itself. It's brilliant work, the kind of theoretical physics that should have won Nobel Prizes if it hadn't been buried under military classifications. "There's something else," Dwight continues. "The refugees aren't from another planet. They're from another version of Earth, a parallel dimension where humanity took a different evolutionary path, developed different technologies. You mean they're us? Tommy asks. A version of us, what we might have become if we'd learned to think in 12 dimensions instead of 3. Dwight closes the notebook. They've been trying to get home for 50 years, ever since their dimensional drive malfunctioned and stranded them on our moon. But the hunters followed them across realities, and now both species are trapped in our space-time. I look across the lake, where one of the hunter ships hangs motionless in the dimensional barrier. Its crystalline structure pulses with internal light, beautiful and alien and utterly hostile. What happens if I don't do this? The barrier collapses in approximately 67 hours, Dwight says, checking a device that looks like a cross between a stopwatch and a compass. When it does, the dimensional feedback will tear a permanent hole in space-time. The hunters will have free access to every parallel version of Earth that exists. How many versions? Infinite. The weight of that number settles over me like a physical thing. I think about all the versions of Tommy out there, all the versions of myself, all the billions of people living their lives in parallel realities who have no idea their existence depends on a decision made by a brain-damaged astronaut sitting beside a lake in East Texas. I need to know something first, I tell Dwight. In 1974, after we came back from the moon, what happened during my debriefing? Dwight hesitates, then opens his notebook to a page filled with medical diagrams. You were in a coma for 6 days. During that time, military surgeons implanted the neural modification hardware directly into your temporal lobe. When you woke up, you had no memory of the surgery. And the other 2 astronauts from Apollo 18. Bobby Hendricks died during his modification surgery, neural rejection, massive brain hemorrhage. Dwight's voice becomes quieter. David Kim survived the surgery but couldn't handle the voices. He put a gun in his mouth 3 months later. I close my eyes, seeing their faces from the mission photographs. Bobby with his Texas drawl and his collection of bad jokes. David with his engineering precision and his obsession with Star Trek. Both dead because of choices made in classified rooms by people whose names I'll never know. The military has been using us as experimental subjects for 43 years, I realize. And now they want you to complete the experiment, become the first successful human-alien hybrid, bridging the gap between species. Dwight stands up, brushing dirt from his clothes. The question is whether you'll do it to save Earth, or to spite the bastards who ruined your life. Tommy grabs my arm with his good hand. There has to be another way. There isn't. I look at him. This man who's been my friend since we were both young and stupid enough to believe in the nobility of military service. But I need you to do something for me. Anything. I pull out my wallet and remove a photograph that I've been carrying for 43 years. It shows my father, standing beside his crop duster back in 1962, wearing his old Army Air Force jacket and grinning at the camera. He died while I was training for the Apollo program, never knowing his son would walk on the moon. Take this back to Houston, find my nephew, Billy Morrison, and tell him what really happened up there. Tell him the government turned his uncle into a lab rat, but that he died trying to save something bigger than himself. Tommy takes the photograph with trembling fingers. Jake, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I stand up, feeling the damaged neural pathways in my skull beginning to tingle with anticipation. And I need you to make sure the story gets told. The real story, not the classified version. People deserve to know what their government does in the name of national security. General Hawthorne approaches us, her dimensional suit humming with contained energy. Morrison, we need to discuss your options. I've already made my choice, I tell her, but not for you, not for the military, for everyone else. The lake water ripples, showing reflections of the refugee ship hanging in the dimensional barrier. Through its translucent hull, I can see the beings inside, geometric forms of living light, beautiful and patient and utterly inhuman. They've been waiting 50 years to go home. It's time to help them find their way. The interface begins at dawn, when the dimensional barrier starts showing its first signs of instability. I'm standing waist-deep in the lake, the water around me shimmering with temporal distortions that make my reflection appear as a young astronaut, an old man, and something that might not be human at all. The refugee ship hovers directly overhead, its translucent hull pulsing with geometric patterns that sync with my damaged neural pathways. Dimensional barrier degradation at 12%, Dwight calls from the shore, reading from instruments that exist in several dimensions simultaneously. You've got maybe an hour before total collapse. Behind him, General Hawthorne's soldiers have formed a perimeter around the lake, their weapons trained on me but their faces uncertain. They know they can't stop what's about to happen, but military training dies hard. "Last chance, Morrison," Hawthorne shouts through her amplifier. "Come back to shore and we'll find another solution." "There is no other solution," I call back, feeling the first tendrils of alien consciousness brushing against my mind. The sensation is indescribable, like having someone whisper mathematics directly into your soul. You've had 43 years to find one. Tommy stands at the water's edge, his broken arm still in its sling, my father's photograph clutched in his good hand. "Jake, are you sure about this?" "I've never been sure about anything in my life, but this feels right." The refugee ship descends until it's barely 10 feet above the water. Up close, I can see that it's not made of any material that exists in our reality. It's constructed from crystallized space-time itself, solid geometry that bends light around it in impossible ways. Doorways open in its hull, revealing chambers filled with living mathematics. "Jake Morrison," the voice speaks directly into my mind, clearer now than it's ever been. "Are you prepared for integration? What will happen to me? Your individual consciousness will be preserved but transformed. You will become a bridge between dimensional spaces, capable of existing in multiple realities simultaneously. But your human form will be lost." I look back at Tommy one last time, memorizing his weathered face, the stubborn set of his jaw, the way he's trying not to cry. "Take care of yourself, you old bastard." "You too, Jake." I dive beneath the surface. The water is no longer water, it's liquid possibility, every drop containing infinite variations of reality. I swim downward through layers of existence, each one showing me a different version of this moment. In one, I never went to the moon. In another, Apollo 18 was a public mission that changed the course of human history. In a third, the dimensional barrier never formed, and Earth died screaming as the hunters consumed reality itself. "Prepare for neural interface," the voice says, as tendrils of living light descend from the ship above. The first contact feels like lightning striking the inside of my skull. Every damaged neural pathway ignites at once, creating connections that span not just my brain, but multiple dimensions of space-time. I can suddenly perceive the refugee ship as it truly is, not a vessel but a living organism, a collective consciousness that has been trying to find its way home for 5 decades. "We are the architects," they explain, and suddenly I understand. They're not aliens or parallel humans. They're what humanity becomes in the far future. Beings who learn to think in pure mathematics and build their civilization from folded space-time itself. The ship that crashed on our moon was a time traveler, trying to return to its own era after a reconnaissance mission to the past. But the temporal displacement damaged our navigation cortex. We became lost in the dimensional maze between past and future. The hunters followed our trail, seeking to prevent our return to the timeline where we defeat them. The second wave of interface nearly tears my consciousness apart. I can feel my human thoughts being translated into geometric concepts, my memories converted into navigational data. The scarred neural tissue left by 43 years of modifications serves as a bridge, allowing the architect's mathematical consciousness to merge with my biological brain. The barrier must be destabilized in precise sequence, they show me, downloading navigation protocols directly into my dying neurons. Each dimensional anchor point must be collapsed in harmony with the others, creating a resonance cascade that will free all trapped entities. What about the hunters? I manage to think. They will be returned to their own temporal zone. The dimensional breach will seal itself, preventing future incursions. Above us, General Hawthorne's soldiers are shooting into the water, their bullets creating ripples in space-time that propagate backward through history. I watch the rounds trace impossible trajectories through the lake, aging and corroding before they reach me, their metal returning to ore, then to stellar nucleosynthesis, then to the quantum foam that existed before atoms. The third interface burns away everything that was human about my thoughts. I become a living equation, a consciousness expressed in pure mathematical language. Through the architect's extended senses, I can perceive the dimensional barrier as a complex knot in space-time, tied by my own desperate actions 3 hours ago. Begin the unraveling sequence, they instruct. I reach out with senses that no longer entirely belong to me and grasp the first anchor point. It feels like holding a star in my bare hands, burning, massive, fundamental to the structure of local reality. But I can see how to unknot it, how to collapse its dimensional stability without destroying the space-time around it. The first anchor dissolves and the barrier shimmers like a soap bubble. "Jake!" Tommy's voice sounds impossibly distant, filtered through layers of mathematics that translate emotion into geometric patterns. "Whatever you're doing, it's working. The hunter ships are moving." I dissolve the second anchor, then the third. Each collapse sends waves of dimensional instability through the barrier, but now I can control those waves, directing them toward specific frequencies that will open portals rather than create chaos. The fourth anchor resists. It's tied to my own neural pathways, woven into the same brain tissue that's allowing me to interface with the architects. To collapse it, I'll have to sacrifice the last remnants of my human consciousness. This is the choice point, the architects explain. You can preserve your individual identity and allow the barrier to remain partially stable, trapping us all, but maintaining your humanity. Or you can complete the dissolution and lose yourself in the collective mathematical consciousness. Below me, the lake bottom has become transparent, showing infinite parallel versions of this moment. In most of them, I choose to preserve myself and doom countless parallel Earths. In a few, I make the sacrifice and become something beyond human understanding. I think of Tommy holding my father's photograph. I think of my nephew Billy, who deserves to know the truth about what his uncle became. I think of all the versions of Earth hanging in the dimensional void, all the people who have no idea their existence depends on a choice made by a brain-damaged astronaut in a Texas lake. I dissolve the fourth anchor. My human consciousness explodes outward, fragmenting across multiple dimensions. I feel myself becoming part of the architect's collective mind, my memories and experiences added to their vast mathematical library. But I also feel something unexpected. The neural pathways scarred by 43 years of alien contact have created a unique pattern, a human fingerprint in the mathematical consciousness that allows me to retain some individual identity. Jake Morrison, the architects say, and now it's my voice speaking with theirs. The bridge builder, the one who chose sacrifice over survival. The barrier collapses in a cascade of released energy. The hunter ships, suddenly free, spiral upward through dimensions I can no longer see clearly, returning to their own temporal zone. The architect's ship begins to fade as it aligns with its proper timeline. But I remain, spread across multiple dimensions like a ghost made of equations. Part of me exists with the architects in their mathematical paradise. Part of me stays anchored to this reality, tethered by the scarred neural tissue that was once my brain. I can see Tommy standing in the shallow water, staring up at the empty sky where impossible ships once hung. The soldiers are lowering their weapons, confused and defeated. General Hawthorne is screaming into her radio, trying to explain to her superiors how a brain-damaged astronaut just set free the most valuable alien technology in human history. "Will you be all right?" I try to ask Tommy, but the words come out as mathematical symbols that spell themselves across the surface of the lake in characters of living light. He seems to understand anyway. "Will I see you again?" I consider the question across 12 dimensions of possibility. My consciousness exists now in spaces between thoughts, in the gaps between seconds, in the mathematical structures that define the relationship between cause and effect. The lake grows still. Reality settles back into its familiar 3 dimensions. The sun rises over East Texas, and for the first time in 43 years, the only voice in my head is my own. 10 years later, Billy Morrison sets down his beer and stares across the porch of his ranch house, watching heat lightning flicker over the Texas hill country. He's 37 now, with his uncle's stubborn jaw and his grandfather's steady hands, making a decent living as a crop duster just like his family always has. "You're telling me Uncle Jake saved the world," he says finally. Tommy Briggs shifts in his chair, his left arm still hanging slightly crooked from that night in the forest. The military doctors fixed the break, but some things don't heal quite right. "I'm telling you what happened. Whether you believe it or not is up to you." On the table between them sits a manila folder, its edges yellowed with age. Inside are photographs that shouldn't exist, documents that were supposed to be destroyed, and a single piece of rock that gleams like obsidian but feels warm to the touch. "The government buried it all," Tommy continues. "Classified the lake area as a toxic waste site, posted guards around the perimeter for 6 months, then just left. Now it's a state park, perfectly normal except for the fish." "What about the fish?" "They live too long. Park rangers find base that should have died decades ago, still swimming around like nothing happened. But they won't talk about it officially." Billy picks up the rock, feeling its strange warmth. For just a moment, he could swear he hears something, not quite a voice, but a pattern in the background noise of cicadas and wind. Something that might be his uncle's name, spelled out in mathematics. "General Hawthorne died in a car accident 3 years after the incident," Tommy says. "Single vehicle crash on a clear day, no mechanical problems. The official report said she fell asleep at the wheel." "And Dwight?" "Opened a bookstore in Austin. Sells science fiction novels and books about theoretical physics. Seems happy enough, but he never talks about his NASA days. Not even to me." Billy studies the photographs, seeing his uncle as a young man in a spacesuit, standing beside equipment that doesn't appear in any history book. There's something about Jake's expression in the photos, a weight in his eyes that suggests he already knew how his story would end. "Why tell me this now?" Billy asks. "Because someone needs to know. Because the story shouldn't die with me." Tommy pulls out a faded photograph. Billy's grandfather standing beside his crop duster, grinning at the camera. "Jake wanted you to have this. Wanted you to understand that sometimes a man has to make choices that cost him everything." Billy takes the photograph, seeing his grandfather's face reflected in his uncle's final sacrifice. Outside, the heat lightning grows brighter, and for just a moment the night sky seems to shimmer with patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Do you think he's still out there?" Billy asks. "Still conscious somehow?" Tommy considers the question, listening to the familiar sounds of a Texas evening. Somewhere in the distance, a radio crackles with static that almost sounds like conversation. "Sometimes I think I can feel him," Tommy admits, "when the mathematics get too complex, when the equations don't quite balance. Like he's still there, working the numbers from the other side." They sit in comfortable silence as the lightning fades and the stars emerge. Normal stars in normal patterns, following laws of physics that make sense to human minds. But Billy Morrison keeps the warm rock in his pocket, and sometimes, late at night when he's flying his crop duster over the hill country, he swears he can hear his uncle's voice in the radio static, teaching him to count in 12 dimensions,